December 7th, 1943. The small village of Bellerive, nestled in the rolling hills of occupied France, lay shrouded in winter fog as Marguerite Dupont stared out her cottage window, watching German soldiers march through the village square. She believed, like most in her village, that liberation would never come to their forgotten corner of France. The Americans and British were rumored to be planning something big for the coming spring, but spring seemed impossibly distant in the bitter cold of winter. Marguerite could never have imagined that before the next sunrise, her ordinary life would transform her into someone the entire village would later call a hero or a fool, depending on whom you asked. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a single act of compassion during the darkest days of World War II would not only alter the course of one woman's life, but would reveal how the smallest decisions made in times of impossible choices can ripple through history long after the gunfire falls silent. The winter of 1943 had been particularly harsh in this region of France. Food was scarce, with most produce being shipped to German troops on the Eastern Front. Marguerite, a 32-year-old widow whose husband had been killed during the initial invasion of France 3 years earlier, maintained a small dairy farm with just 4 cows and a modest vegetable garden. German rationing meant she was permitted to keep only enough to barely survive, with the remainder going to the occupation forces. "You are required to deliver an additional 4 liters of milk by Thursday," announced Oberfeldwebel Werner Keller, the local German quartermaster, as he stood in Marguerite's doorway that afternoon. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air, his uniform immaculate despite the muddy roads. "4 additional liters, but Oberfeldwebel, I have already met my quota for the month. My cows cannot produce more in this cold," Marguerite replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Keller's face remained impassive. "Then I suggest you feed them better, or find creative solutions to your problem, Madame Dupont. 4 liters by Thursday, or there will be consequences." Marguerite knew what consequences meant. Last summer, old Monsieur Baudin had failed to meet his wheat quota, claiming poor soil and drought. The German authorities had confiscated his entire farm and sent him to a labor camp. No one had heard from him since. "I understand, Oberfeldwebel. I will find a way," she said quietly, closing the door as he turned to leave. In the neighboring farm, Claude Moreau, a 67-year-old farmer with arthritis that twisted his fingers into painful knots, observed the exchange from behind his barn. Claude had been documenting German troop movements through the village, information he passed along through a complex network of resistance operatives. His journal entries, written in a code disguised as farming records, contained precise details of German unit strengths, supply schedules, and officer rotations. Entry for December 7th. 6 trucks, approximately 60 men, 12th Panzer Division insignia. Fuel reserves observed at church storage. Approximately 4,000 liters, Claude had written that morning. That evening, as darkness settled over the village like a heavy blanket, Marguerite sat at her kitchen table, mending a worn pair of wool socks by the dim light of a single candle. Electricity was reserved for German headquarters in the village, and civilians were permitted power for only 2 hours each day, usually during times when it served no practical purpose. The low drone of aircraft engines hummed in the distance. Air raids had become common, but they typically targeted larger cities like Lyon or industrial centers. Bellerive, with its population of just 412 souls, held little strategic importance. The sound grew louder, different from the usual formations that passed overhead. This was a single engine, laboring, the pitch uneven and strained. Marguerite moved to her window, pulling aside the blackout curtain just enough to peek outside. The night sky was clear now, stars puncturing the darkness like tiny holes in black fabric. A moment later, she saw it. A plane, flying dangerously low, a trail of smoke streaming behind it. The aircraft wobbled, dipped, then disappeared behind the tree line to the west, toward the old Clermont vineyard that had been abandoned since the occupation began. Then came the sound, not the catastrophic explosion she expected, but a series of crashes, snapping trees, and a final metallic groan that echoed across the valley. Marguerite hesitated. The German night patrols would have heard it too. Standing in her darkened kitchen, She faced the first of many decisions that would change her life forever. Investigation meant risk. Inaction meant potential complicity in a death that might be prevented. After 3 minutes of internal debate that felt like 3 hours, she grabbed her coat, a small medical kit that had belonged to her husband, and a lantern that she kept unlit until she was well away from the village. The night was cold enough to make her lungs ache with each breath. Frost had already formed on the winter-dead grass, crunching beneath her boots as she made her way through the forest path she knew by heart, even in darkness. The Clément vineyard lay 2 kilometers west of her farm, a journey that took her 26 minutes at a hurried pace. The crash site announced itself with the smell of fuel and hot metal before she could see it. Marguerite approached cautiously, finally lighting her lantern when she was certain no German patrols were nearby. The aircraft had carved a jagged scar through the vineyard's orderly rows before coming to rest against an old stone wall. One wing had been sheared off completely, and the fuselage was crumpled like paper. She recognized the White Star insignia immediately. American. "Hello," she called softly in French, then remembered and switched to the few English phrases she knew. "Is anyone there? Are you hurt?" A groan emanated from the wreckage, followed by labored movement. A figure emerged, dragging himself from the cockpit. Even in the dim lantern light, Marguerite could see the dark stains spreading across his flight jacket. "Please," the pilot said, his accent unmistakably American. "Help." Flight Lieutenant Thomas Dalton of the United States Army Air Force's 365th Fighter Group had been returning from a reconnaissance mission over German supply lines when anti-aircraft fire had struck his P-51 Mustang's coolant system. He had managed to fly nearly 80 kilometers with a failing engine before the aircraft became uncontrollable. Marguerite rushed forward, helping the young man, he looked no older than 25, away from the wreckage. The smell of aviation fuel permeated everything, and she knew fire was a very real possibility. "We must hurry," she said, gesturing to communicate her meaning. "Germans will come soon." Lieutenant Dalton nodded, grimacing as he put weight on his left leg. Blood seeped through a tear in his flight suit just above the knee. Together they hobbled away from the crash site, Dalton leaning heavily on Marguerite's shoulder. They had covered perhaps 300 meters when the sound of German trucks echoed through the valley. "Schneller! In diese Richtung!" German voices called out. "Faster! In this direction!" Marguerite extinguished her lantern and pulled Dalton into a drainage ditch overgrown with dead winter vines. They lay perfectly still as beams from German flashlights swept the area. 6 German soldiers passed within 15 meters of their position, heading directly toward the crash site. "We wait," she whispered, using gestures to convey her meaning. "Then my farm." The journey back took 3 times longer than her approach had. Dalton's wound, while not immediately life-threatening, had weakened him considerably. Blood loss and the cold December air had left him pale and shivering by the time they reached Marguerite's small stone farmhouse. With great effort, she helped him inside and secured the blackout curtains before lighting a lamp. In the proper light, she could finally assess her unexpected guest. Lieutenant Thomas Dalton was indeed young, perhaps 24 or 25, with sandy blonde hair cut short under his flight cap and eyes the color of the summer sky. The wound on his leg was a jagged tear, likely from shrapnel that had penetrated the aircraft's fuselage during the anti-aircraft barrage. Using the limited medical supplies from her kit and knowledge gained from assisting the village doctor before the war, Marguerite cleaned the wound with homemade alcohol distilled from potato scraps. Dalton gritted his teeth, but made no sound as she worked, removing a small fragment of metal from his thigh. "Thank you," he said when she had finished bandaging the injury. His French was heavily accented but understandable. "You saved my life." "You speak French?" Marguerite asked, surprised. "A little. College classes." "Not very good," he replied with a weak smile. Marguerite offered him water and a small piece of bread with cheese, precious commodities that she could ill afford to share, yet found herself giving without hesitation. "The Germans will search for you," she said gravely. "They will check houses." Dalton nodded, understanding. "I need to contact my squadron. Do you have a radio?" Marguerite shook her head. "No radio. Germans forbid. Very dangerous." She considered her options carefully. Harboring an Allied serviceman carried an automatic death sentence. The logical choice would be to help him recover enough strength to move on, perhaps to connect with resistance networks that could evacuate him through Spain. But logic seemed a distant concern compared to the immediate reality of a wounded man who would certainly be executed if discovered. "You will stay in the cellar," she decided. "There is a hidden space behind the wine barrels. My husband built it. Before." Dalton seemed to understand the unfinished sentence. "Your husband?" "Dead. 1940. Sedan." The simplicity of her response conveyed more than elaborate explanation could have. With considerable effort, they managed to reach the cellar. The hidden compartment was small, originally designed to conceal valuables rather than a full-grown man, but it would serve its purpose. Marguerite provided blankets, water, and what little food she could spare. "I will return in the morning," she promised. "Try to rest." Sleep came fitfully that night for Marguerite. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every distant engine sound jerked her back to consciousness. By dawn, she had formulated a plan, not a good one, but the only one available. Claude Moreau had connections with the resistance. If anyone could help smuggle an American pilot to safety, it would be him. The following morning arrived with the sound of German trucks. Marguerite's heart nearly stopped when she looked out her window to see 3 military vehicles pulling up outside her farm. Oberfeldwebel Keller stepped out of the lead truck, accompanied by a full squad of soldiers and someone new, a tall officer in the black uniform of the German security services. Forcing herself to appear calm, Marguerite opened her door before they could knock. "Oberfeldwebel Keller, what brings you here so early?" Keller's expression was unreadable. "Sturmbannführer Müller wishes to speak with you, Madame Dupont." The security officer stepped forward, his German accent thick as he spoke in French. "An American aircraft crashed near here last night. The pilot survived and escaped. We have reason to believe he may have sought assistance in this area." Marguerite allowed a look of surprise to cross her face. "An American pilot? Here? I heard planes, but I assumed they were yours. May we come in?" It wasn't really a question. "Of course." Marguerite stepped aside, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they could hear it. The Germans conducted a thorough search of the farmhouse, checking closets, looking under beds, opening cupboards. When they reached the cellar door, Marguerite felt her mouth go dry. "Just storage down there," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And my cows winter feed." Sturmbannführer Müller smiled thinly. "We will check nevertheless." 2 soldiers descended into the cellar with flashlights. Marguerite stood at the top of the stairs, every muscle in her body tense as the beams of light swept across the space below. The hidden compartment behind the wine barrels remained undiscovered, the soldiers paying it no special attention. "Nothing here, Herr Sturmbannführer," one reported as they returned. Müller studied Marguerite's face carefully. "You live alone, Madame Dupont?" "Since my husband died, yes." "And you heard or saw nothing unusual last night?" "Only the planes, as I mentioned. I went to bed early. The cows need milking before dawn." The officer continued to observe her, his pale blue eyes revealing nothing. Finally, he nodded. "If you see or hear anything suspicious, you will report it immediately. Harboring enemies of the Reich is punishable by death. You understand this?" "Yes, Herr Sturmbannführer," Marguerite replied, lowering her eyes in what she hoped appeared to be submission rather than avoidance. As the Germans prepared to leave, Oberfeldwebel Keller added, "Remember 4 additional liters of milk by tomorrow, Madame Dupont." "Yes, Oberfeldwebel." When the vehicles had disappeared down the rutted farm road, Marguerite collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. She allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to experience the terror that had been building, then forced it aside. There was work to be done. After completing her morning chores, Marguerite made her way to Claude Moreau's farm, under the pretense of borrowing a tool. The old man was in his barn, carefully documenting something in his coded journal when she entered. "Marguerite," he greeted her warmly, quickly tucking the small book into his pocket. "What brings you here?" She glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking in a hushed voice. "I need your help." "Claude, it is dangerous, and if you refuse, I will understand." The old farmer's eyes narrowed with interest. "Go on." An American pilot crashed in the Clermont vineyard last night. He is wounded but alive. He is hiding in my cellar. Claude inhaled sharply. The Germans are searching everywhere for him. I know, they came to my farm this morning. And they did not find him? No. But they will be back. I am certain of it. Claude considered this information carefully, his arthritic fingers drumming a thoughtful rhythm on his thigh. There is a network, he said finally. People who help Allied airmen return to England, but contacting them takes time, perhaps a week. A week? Marguerite's voice rose slightly before she controlled it. The Germans will search every house in the village before then. Perhaps, Claude agreed, but there are others who can help. Marie at the bakery, Dr. Fournier, even Father Laurent at the church. We are not as isolated as the Germans believe. That afternoon, a carefully orchestrated series of movements began throughout Bellerive. Marie Leclerc, whose bakery provided bread to the German garrison, passed a note to Dr. Henri Fournier when he came in for his daily loaf. The doctor, during his regular visit to check on the elderly priest's heart condition, whispered something to Father Laurent. By evening, 6 trusted villagers knew of the American pilot's presence, each responsible for a small part of what would become an intricate plan. Marguerite returned to her farm with bandages and antiseptic, secretly provided by Dr. Fournier, hidden in a basket of eggs. She found Lieutenant Dalton feverish, his wounded leg inflamed despite her careful cleaning. Infection, she explained, helping him swallow 2 precious aspirin tablets. The doctor will come tomorrow night. Why? Dalton asked, his voice weak. Why risk your life for me? Marguerite paused, considering the question. 3 years of occupation had taught her to keep her head down, to comply, to survive. Yet here she was, committing an act that could result in her execution. The answer came from somewhere deep within her. Because before they came, we were human beings who helped each other, she said simply. I will not let them take that from me, too. The night passed with Marguerite constantly checking on her patient, applying cool compresses to his forehead as fever caused him to drift in and out of consciousness. By morning, the worst had passed, though Dalton remained weak. When Dr. Fournier arrived the following evening, disguised as a fellow farmer coming to discuss shared equipment, he examined the wound with professional efficiency. The infection is responding to treatment, he announced, but he needs proper antibiotics. I have a small amount of penicillin reserved for emergencies. This qualifies. The doctor administered the medication, then turned to Marguerite. Claude says the network has been contacted. 5 days until they can move him. Can you manage until then? Yes, she replied without hesitation. Over the next 3 days, Lieutenant Dalton's condition improved markedly. As his strength returned, Marguerite learned more about the young man she had risked everything to save. Thomas Dalton was 26 years old, the son of a history teacher from Connecticut. He had been a college student studying engineering when Pearl Harbor had brought America into the war. His squadron was based in southern England, flying reconnaissance and escort missions over occupied territory. My mom would like you, he told Marguerite, as she changed his bandage on the 3rd day. She always said kindness was the only thing worth having that didn't cost anything. Your mother sounds wise, Marguerite replied, smiling. My mother always said men who crashed airplanes into vineyards were nothing but trouble. Dalton laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his healing wound. Your mother said that often, did she? All the time. It was a significant problem in pre-war France. Their shared laughter, brief as it was, felt to Marguerite like the first normal moment she had experienced in years. War and occupation had a way of stripping away simple human joys, replacing them with constant fear and suspicion. This small moment of connection reminded her of what life had been before and what it might someday be again. That afternoon, as Marguerite was feeding her cows, she noticed unusual activity in the village. Additional German vehicles had arrived, and soldiers were setting up checkpoints on the roads leading into Bellerive. Something had changed, and not for the better. Claude Moreau confirmed her fears when he arrived under the guise of returning the borrowed tool. They found his parachute, he whispered, hidden in the vineyard. They know he ejected safely and is still in the area. Door-to-door searches will begin tomorrow. The network? Marguerite asked. 2 more days at minimum. That is not soon enough. Claude nodded grimly. There is another way. Riskier. There is a British agent operating near Dijon. He has a radio. He could call for an extraction. How do we contact this agent? We signal with laundry patterns. Her white sheet with a red cloth in the northeast corner means urgent communication needed. The agent checks from the hill above town. And then? If he sees it, he will make contact. If not. Claude shrugged. The following morning, Marguerite hung her washing in the prescribed pattern, her movements casual despite the German patrol passing on the road nearby. The white sheet with Marie's red dishcloth in the corner fluttered innocuously in the winter breeze. By midday, the German door-to-door searches had begun on the far side of the village. Sturmbannführer Müller personally supervised the operation, methodically working from house to house, building to building. Thoroughness suggested they would reach Marguerite's farm by late afternoon the following day. As dusk approached, Marguerite was gathering eggs from her henhouse when a voice spoke quietly from the shadows behind her. The laundry signal was most distinctive. She nearly dropped her basket as she spun around. A man dressed as a common laborer stood there, his accent marking him as neither French nor German. "Are you—" she began. "Names are unnecessary," he interrupted. "I understand you have a package that needs urgent delivery." "Yes," Marguerite replied, quickly recovering her composure. "An American pilot, wounded but recovering. The Germans will search my farm tomorrow." The British agent nodded. "I can radio London tonight. Best case scenario, extraction tomorrow night. Worst case, not at all. Where? The old quarry 2 kilometers north. Midnight tomorrow, if they can send someone." He turned to leave, then paused. "If they cannot come tomorrow, destroy any evidence of his presence. The Germans are bringing dogs for the next round of searches." With that ominous warning, he slipped away into the gathering darkness, leaving Marguerite with a mixture of hope and dread. She returned to the house to find Dalton attempting to stand, using the wall for support. "The Germans are searching houses," she told him. "They will be here tomorrow." "Then I need to leave," he said firmly. "I won't let you be caught helping me." "There may be an extraction tomorrow night. British intelligence has been contacted." Dalton's expression brightened momentarily, then darkened again. "And if there isn't?" Marguerite had no answer for that. That night, as Lieutenant Dalton slept in his hidden space, Marguerite prepared for all possibilities. She created a small pack with food, a compass she had kept hidden since her husband's death, and a crude map showing the route to the Spanish border, over 300 kilometers away. If extraction failed, it would be a desperate journey, but better than certain capture. She slept fitfully, waking at the smallest sounds. Shortly after 3 in the morning, the distant drone of aircraft passed overhead, Allied bombers heading for targets in Germany, flying too high to be concerned with a tiny French village and its problems. Morning brought a cold, steady rain that turned the farm roads to mud. The German search parties would be slowed, but not stopped. Through her window, Marguerite could see them methodically working through the village, now just 20 houses away from her farm. Midday came with an unexpected visitor. Oberfeldwebel Keller arrived alone, his motorcycle spattered with mud from the unpaved roads. "Madame Dupont," he greeted her formally as she answered her door. "I have come to collect the additional milk you were ordered to provide." Marguerite had completely forgotten about the milk quota in the chaos of recent days. "Of course, Oberfeldwebel. Please come in while I prepare it." Inside, she moved to the small cold storage area where she kept milk cans. Keller followed, his eyes moving carefully around the interior of her home. "The searches go well?" she asked, trying to sound casually interested. "Thorough, as all German operations are," he replied. Then more quietly, "Sturmbannführer Müller is very determined to find this American." Something in his tone made Marguerite pause. She studied Keller's face carefully and saw something unexpected there, a warning. "I imagine he must be," she responded cautiously. "The penalty for harboring enemies is severe." Keller held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Indeed, death for anyone involved. The pilot, those who hide him, those who know of his whereabouts but fail to report it. Everyone. He emphasized the last word in a way that sent a chill through Marguerite. Did he know? Was this some elaborate trap? "I will have your milk ready shortly," she said, turning away to hide her expression. As she filled the containers, Keller moved to her window, looking out toward the approaching search parties. "They will reach your farm by sunset," he observed. "Müller has ordered every building searched 3 times, including hidden spaces behind walls or under floors." Now the warning was unmistakable. Marguerite set the milk containers on the table, her mind racing. "Will you be conducting the search of my farm, Oberfeldwebel?" "No. Müller has assigned that task to men from outside our village. Men who do not know the local residents." Keller turned from the window. "Men with no reason to be less thorough." The implication hung in the air between them. Keller collected the milk containers and moved toward the door. As he reached it, he paused without turning around. "The old quarry road is not being patrolled tonight. Budget constraints have forced us to focus resources elsewhere." His voice was barely above a whisper. "This information is, of course, confidential." Before Marguerite could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like the closing of one path and the opening of another. Lieutenant Dalton could see the confusion on Marguerite's face when she brought him lunch. "What happened?" he asked. She explained Keller's strange behavior, the veiled warnings, the mention of the unpatrolled quarry road, the same location where the extraction might occur. "Do you think he knows?" Dalton asked. "I think he suspects," Marguerite replied. "But more importantly, I think he chose not to see. Can you trust him? 3 years ago, I would have said no German could be trusted. Now," she shrugged, "war changes people in unexpected ways. Sometimes it reveals character rather than creating it." The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Through her window, Marguerite could see the German search teams drawing ever closer, now just 10 houses away. By her estimation, they would reach her farm within 3 hours. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Claude Moreau appeared at her back door, his face grim. "The British agent made contact," he said without preamble. "Extraction tonight at the quarry, midnight. A small aircraft will land for no more than 3 minutes." "And if we miss those 3 minutes?" Marguerite asked. "Then God help you both," Claude replied simply. The old farmer had brought civilian clothes for Dalton, worn work pants, a faded shirt, and a laborer's cap that would at least partially disguise him if they were stopped. The American pilot's flight suit and dog tags were carefully buried in Claude's compost heap, where decomposing matter would mask any scent from German dogs. As dusk approached, Marguerite made a difficult decision. With the search parties now just 5 houses away, waiting until midnight was too risky. They would leave immediately, hiding in the woods near the quarry until the extraction aircraft arrived. "We should go separately," Dalton argued. "If you're caught with me—" "If I'm caught helping you leave or caught helping you hide, the result is the same," Marguerite interrupted. "We go together. I know paths through the forest that do not appear on maps." They left through the root cellar's exterior doors, carefully concealed by a woodpile. The rain had stopped, but the ground remained muddy, their footprints clearly visible in the soft earth. There was nothing to be done about that now. The journey to the quarry would normally take 45 minutes on foot, but Dalton's injured leg and the need to avoid roads slowed their progress considerably. Darkness fell quickly, making navigation more difficult, but providing welcome cover. They had traveled perhaps half the distance when the sound of vehicles on the main road forced them to take cover in a drainage ditch. German trucks passed within 20 meters of their position, headlights cutting through the gloom. "Search parties," Marguerite whispered. "They must have reached my farm and found it empty." The vehicles continued toward the village, but their presence confirmed what Marguerite already suspected. The Germans were expanding their search perimeter. The race to the quarry had become even more urgent. They resumed their journey, moving as quickly as Dalton's injured leg would allow. The American pilot never complained, though Marguerite could see the pain etched on his face with each step. By the time they reached the edge of the forest overlooking the abandoned quarry, it was just after 9 o'clock. 3 hours remained until the scheduled extraction. The quarry itself was a gaping wound in the earth, where limestone had been harvested for centuries before the war had halted operations. A single dirt road led down into its depths, with sheer walls rising 15 to 20 meters on all sides. The extraction aircraft would have just enough space to land on the quarry floor, provided the pilot was skilled enough. "Now we wait," Marguerite said, finding a sheltered position among the trees where they could observe the quarry while remaining hidden. The night grew colder as clouds cleared, revealing a sky studded with stars and a waning moon that cast silver light across the landscape. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Under present ones, the illumination was a liability. At 11:15, distant engine sounds caused both fugitives to freeze. Headlights appeared on the road leading to the quarry, a German patrol vehicle moving slowly, methodically sweeping the area. "They're searching the quarry road," Dalton whispered. "Keller said it would be unpatrolled." "Either he was wrong or he lied," Marguerite replied grimly. They watched in tense silence as the vehicle descended into the quarry, its headlights illuminating the open space where the extraction aircraft was meant to land in 45 minutes. The patrol car circled the quarry floor once, then parked, its engine idling. Two soldiers emerged, lighting cigarettes that glowed like tiny orange beacons in the darkness. "They're staying," Dalton observed. "The plane can't land with them there." "Perhaps they will leave before midnight," Marguerite suggested without much conviction. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. 11:30 came and went. The German soldiers remained, occasionally walking around their vehicle but showing no signs of departing. At 11:45, Marguerite made a decision. "I will create a distraction," she said. "When they are gone, you must signal the aircraft with this." She handed him a small mirror she had brought for precisely this purpose. 3 quick flashes when you hear the engine. "What kind of distraction?" Dalton asked suspiciously. "The only kind that will work," she replied. Before he could protest, she slipped away into the darkness. Marguerite circled through the forest until she reached the road leading to the quarry. There she deliberately stepped onto the open path and began walking directly toward the quarry entrance, her pace unhurried, her posture deliberately casual. The German soldiers spotted her almost immediately. "Halt!" one called out in German, then switched to French. "Stop there! Identify yourself." Marguerite raised her hands, continuing to approach slowly. "Please," she called in French. "I need help. My cow has escaped. I've been searching for hours." The soldiers conferred briefly, then one raised his rifle while the other approached her. "Why are you out after curfew?" he demanded. "Curfew?" Marguerite feigned confusion. "But Oberfeldwebel Keller said farmers were exempt when tending to livestock emergencies. You can ask him yourself. He knows me, Marguerite Dupont, from the North Farm." The mention of a specific name and the confident reference to their superior gave the soldiers pause. The one approaching lowered his flashlight slightly. "Where did you last see this cow?" "Near the old mill road, heading toward the village. I was hoping to cut through the quarry to intercept her before she reaches the main road. If a military vehicle were to hit her in the darkness." The soldiers exchanged glances. A loose cow on the roads could indeed cause problems for military vehicles. More importantly, it provided a reasonable explanation for her presence that could be easily verified. "We will help you search," the first soldier announced. "It will be faster with our vehicle." This was not what Marguerite had planned. "Oh, but she is very skittish around engine noises. That's why I'm on foot. If we all search on foot—" "Nonsense," the soldier interrupted. "Get in the car. We will drive slowly along the mill road." Marguerite realized she had miscalculated. Now she would be taken away from the quarry, leaving Dalton alone, and the extraction point would remain blocked by the German vehicle. Desperately, she tried to think of another approach. At that moment, the distant drone of an aircraft engine echoed across the valley. All three froze, listening. The sound grew louder, a small plane flying dangerously low. "That's not one of ours," the second soldier said, reaching for his radio. "Control, this is Patrol 4. Unidentified aircraft approaching quarry sector. Request instructions." While the Germans were distracted by the approaching aircraft, Marguerite made a split-second decision. She turned and ran, not away from the quarry but toward it, shouting at the top of her lungs, "Thomas, the plane! Signal now!" The soldiers reacted instantly, raising their weapons. "Stop or we'll shoot!" one called after her. Marguerite kept running. From the forest edge, she saw 3 quick flashes of light as Dalton used the mirror to signal the pilot. The aircraft was now visible, a dark shape against the star-filled sky descending rapidly toward the quarry floor. A shot rang out. Marguerite felt a searing pain in her left shoulder, but kept moving. More shots followed. Behind her, she heard the soldiers shouting into their radio, calling for reinforcements. The small aircraft, a British Lysander specially modified for extraction operations, touched down on the quarry floor in a cloud of dust. Dalton emerged from the forest edge, limping rapidly toward the plane. Marguerite reached him just as the German patrol car roared to life, its engine revving as the soldiers prepared to intercept them. "Go!" she shouted, pushing Dalton toward the waiting aircraft. "Now!" "Not without you," he insisted, gripping her arm. "I cannot leave my home," she replied. Blood was spreading across her blouse from the bullet wound in her shoulder. "This is my fight. Your war is elsewhere." For a moment, Dalton hesitated. Then understanding dawned in his eyes. He leaned forward and kissed her cheek quickly. "I will come back," he promised. "When this is over, I will find you." "Go," she repeated, pushing him toward the aircraft. Dalton ran the final distance to the Lysander as the German patrol car accelerated across the quarry floor. The pilot had left the engine running, the propeller a blur in the moonlight. As Dalton climbed aboard, the Germans opened fire again. Bullets pinged off the aircraft's metal fuselage as it began to move, gathering speed for takeoff. Marguerite watched the Lysander race across the quarry floor, the German vehicle in pursuit. For a terrible moment, it seemed the aircraft wouldn't achieve enough speed to clear the quarry rim. Then it lifted, barely clearing the stone edge, disappearing into the night sky as German bullets traced ineffective paths beneath it. The soldiers screeched to a halt beside her, weapons trained on her bleeding form. As they placed her under arrest, Marguerite felt no regret, only a profound sense of having done what was right in a world where right and wrong had become hopelessly entangled by war. That night, in a cell at German headquarters in the village schoolhouse, Marguerite Dupont considered her fate. Harboring an enemy combatant carried a death sentence. Her only hope lay in the approaching Allied forces that radio broadcasts said were preparing for a massive invasion in the coming months. If she could survive until liberation came. Sleep eventually claimed her, bringing dreams not of fear, but of flight, soaring above the French countryside in an aircraft piloted by a young American with sandy hair and summer sky eyes, heading toward a future where danger existed only in memory. She awakened at dawn to the sound of boots in the corridor outside her cell. The door swung open to reveal Oberfeldwebel Keller and 4 American soldiers in full combat gear. The impossible sight made her wonder if she was still dreaming. "Marguerite Dupont," one of the Americans asked in accented French. "Lieutenant Thomas Dalton sent us. We've come to take you home." Marguerite blinked in confusion, certain she must be hallucinating. American soldiers in Bellerive? It was impossible. The Allied forces were hundreds of kilometers away, still preparing for the rumored invasion of France that might not come for months. "How?" she managed to ask, her voice weak from pain and exhaustion. The American sergeant stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant James Miller, United States Army, 101st Airborne Division. Lieutenant Dalton reached England and reported what you did for him. We've been operating behind enemy lines for 3 weeks, coordinating with local resistance." Oberfeldwebel Keller spoke next, his voice low and urgent. "There is little time, Marguerite. The Americans control this sector temporarily, but German reinforcements will arrive within hours. You must leave now." Understanding slowly dawned through her pain and confusion. This was an advance reconnaissance team, not a full liberation force. Their presence was brief, temporary, a dangerous insertion behind enemy lines to gather intelligence and extract high-value targets before the main invasion. "But the village, my farm," Marguerite protested weakly. "We'll still be here when the Allies return in force," Keller said firmly. "But you will not be if you remain. Sturmbannführer Müller has already sent for Gestapo interrogators from Lyon." The mention of the Gestapo sent a chill through Marguerite that had nothing to do with her wound. Stories of their interrogation methods had spread throughout occupied territories, whispered accounts of techniques so brutal that many prisoners died before revealing information. "Why are you helping me?" she asked Keller directly. The German quartermaster's expression revealed a complex mixture of emotions. Because this war has taken too much already. My brother died in Russia last winter. My mother in Hamburg during an Allied bombing. There must be limits to what we allow it to take. He glanced at his watch. We have discussed philosophy long enough. You must go now. Sergeant Miller helped Marguerite to her feet. Her wounded shoulder had been bandaged, though blood had already seeped through the dressing. Can you walk? He asked. Yes, she replied, then proved it by taking several unsteady steps toward the door. The small group moved cautiously through the village schoolhouse that served as German headquarters. The few German soldiers they encountered nodded respectfully to Keller, who had fabricated some official reason for the prisoners' transfer. Outside, a military truck waited, its engine idling. The story will be that resistance fighters attacked during the night and freed you, Keller explained as they reached the vehicle. I will be reprimanded for inadequate security measures, but will survive the embarrassment. Marguerite turned to face the German officer, who had chosen humanity over duty. Why did you warn me yesterday about the quarry road? Perhaps I am not a very good German, Keller replied with the ghost of a smile, or perhaps just a very tired one. Without further explanation, he helped her into the truck where 3 more American soldiers waited. As the vehicle pulled away, Marguerite caught a final glimpse of Oberfeldwebel Werner Keller standing at attention, a solitary figure growing smaller in the distance, a decent man caught on the wrong side of history. The truck moved quickly through the pre-dawn darkness, avoiding main roads in favor of farm tracks and forest paths. Marguerite's mind raced with questions. How had an American reconnaissance team penetrated this far into occupied France? Why risk so much to rescue one French civilian? Where were they taking her? We have a field hospital 20 kilometers from here, Sergeant Miller explained, as if reading her thoughts. Your wound needs proper attention. After that, we'll move you to a secure location until the area is fully liberated. Lieutenant Dalton? She asked. Safe in England. Flew 3 more missions after you saved him. He's the one who convinced command you were worth extracting. Said you saved not just his life, but the lives of every crew he protected on escort missions after his return. Marguerite fell silent, processing this information. Her simple act of compassion had rippled outward, in ways she could never have anticipated, affecting lives far beyond her small corner of France. The journey to the American field hospital took just under an hour. As dawn broke, Marguerite got her first glimpse of an Allied military operation. Hidden within a dense forest, the hospital consisted of 6 large tents, camouflaged from aerial observation, by netting strung through the trees above. Dozens of soldiers moved purposefully between structures, their uniforms mud-splattered, but their movements disciplined and efficient. Inside the main medical tent, an American doctor examined Marguerite's wound with professional detachment. Clean through the trapezius muscle, he reported. No major vessels or bone involvement. You're lucky, Mademoiselle Dupont. Madame, she corrected automatically. My husband died at Sedan in 40. The doctor nodded respectfully. My apologies, Madame. We'll clean this properly and get you some penicillin. You should recover full function with time. As the medical team worked, a new officer entered the tent, an American captain whose uniform bore the insignia of intelligence services. He introduced himself simply as Captain Richards. Madame Dupont, once you're stabilized, we need to debrief you, he said without preamble. Your knowledge of German troop movements and defenses in your sector could be valuable. I am a dairy farmer, Captain, Marguerite replied, not a spy. Nevertheless, you've lived under occupation for 4 years. You've observed patterns, routines, strengths and weaknesses, perhaps without even realizing it. Marguerite thought of Claude Moreau's meticulous journal entries documenting German activities, of Marie Leclerc's careful observations of supply deliveries to the garrison, of Dr. Fournier's knowledge of which officers suffered from which ailments. Every villager in Bellerive possessed pieces of a larger intelligence puzzle, accumulated through years of silent watchfulness. I will tell you what I know, she agreed. The debriefing took place that afternoon in a smaller tent equipped with detailed maps of the region. Captain Richards recorded Marguerite's account of German patrol schedules, supply deliveries, officer rotations and fortification efforts around Bellerive. What had seemed like mundane details of occupation to her were treated as valuable intelligence by the Americans. "This confirms what our other sources have reported," Richards noted with satisfaction, "particularly regarding the ammunition storage facility 5 kilometers east of your village. That will be a primary target when the main force arrives." "When will that be?" Marguerite asked. Richards' expression grew guarded. "I'm not at liberty to share operational timelines, madame, but I can tell you it will be sooner than the Germans expect." That evening, as Marguerite rested on a field cot, Sergeant Miller brought her dinner, actual beef stew with vegetables, the first real meat she had tasted in over a year. As she ate, Miller explained their next steps. "We're moving out before dawn," he said. "This position is temporary. We need to get you further south to a more secure location where you can recuperate until liberation." "And what happens then?" Marguerite asked. "After liberation?" Miller shrugged. "You'll be free to return home, rebuild your life. The war won't last forever, Madame Dupont." Marguerite considered his words. Home. The concept seemed both achingly familiar and strangely distant. Would her cows still be there when she returned? Would her farmhouse remain standing? Would the neighbors who had collaborated with the occupiers face justice, while those who had resisted be honored? The future stretched before her like an unwritten page, frightening in its blankness, yet filled with possibility. Their departure began at 4:30 the following morning, in that grey liminal space between night and dawn. Marguerite, her wounded shoulder properly dressed and her arm in a sling, was helped into one of 3 canvas-covered trucks. 6 other French civilians were already inside, resistance members, downed pilot helpers, and radio operators who had become too compromised to remain in occupied territory. Among them, to Marguerite's surprise, was Claude Moreau. The old farmer's arthritic hands were bandaged, evidence of recent interrogation. "Claude," she exclaimed, "what happened?" "The Germans found my journal," he replied simply. "Not the coded one, thankfully, or I wouldn't be here, but enough to make them suspicious." They were, persistent in their questioning. Marguerite understood the understatement. She gently touched his bandaged hands. "I'm so sorry." Claude shook his head. "Better this than the alternative. Besides, my farming days were nearly over anyway." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Perhaps after the war, I will write a real book, one that needs no code." The convoy moved south through forests and secondary roads, avoiding German checkpoints through careful planning and the guidance of local resistance members. By midday, they had traveled nearly 60 kilometers, entering a region of higher elevation where rugged terrain provided natural concealment. Their destination was a remote mountain lodge that had once catered to wealthy vacationers, but now served as a way station for the resistance network. Surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a single narrow road, its isolation was both protection and potential trap. Captain Richards addressed the evacuees once they had settled in. "You'll remain here until we receive extraction orders. Could be days, could be weeks. The lodge has adequate supplies, and we've established a secure perimeter. 4 of my men will stay as security detail, but otherwise, you're to maintain complete radio silence and minimal visibility." For Marguerite and the others, a strange limbo existence began. They were neither fully free nor captive, neither combatants nor entirely civilians. Together they formed a temporary community of the displaced, bound by shared experience, yet each carrying their own private fears and hopes. April turned to May, bringing warmer weather and longer days to their mountain sanctuary. Marguerite's wound healed steadily, though a dull ache persisted that the American medic assured her would eventually fade. Claude's hands recovered more slowly, the damaged joints in his elderly fingers resistant to healing. Still, his spirits remained remarkably buoyant. "Every morning I wake up not in a German cell is a victory," he told Marguerite as they sat on the lodge's veranda, watching sunset paint the distant peaks gold and crimson. "Every day they don't execute me is a day I've stolen from them." On May 24th, everything changed. The radio operator, a stern-faced American technical sergeant named Donovan, burst into the common room where the evacuees were eating lunch. His expression conveyed news before he spoke a word. "It's starting," he announced. "Allied forces are preparing for a major operation. All personnel are on high alert." No further details were provided, but the mood in the lodge transformed instantly. Tension and anticipation replaced the resigned waiting that had characterized the previous weeks. Even the American soldiers moved with greater purpose, checking weapons more frequently, studying maps with intense focus. 5 days later, on May 29th, Captain Richards returned unexpectedly with fresh troops and supplies. He gathered everyone in the main hall of the lodge, his face revealing both exhaustion and excitement. In approximately 1 week, Allied forces will launch the largest amphibious invasion in military history, he announced. Operation Overlord will establish a foothold in Normandy, from which we'll push inland to liberate France. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Claude Moreau wept openly, his bandaged hands trembling as he covered his face. Marguerite felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed her of breath. After 4 years of occupation, 4 years of fear and deprivation and small daily humiliations, liberation was finally approaching. "What does this mean for us?" asked Marie Leclerc, who had been extracted from Bellerive 2 weeks after Marguerite, when her resistance activities had been compromised. "It means you'll be moved again," Richards replied. "Once the invasion begins, German forces will be looking for any advantage, including hostages or intelligence sources. We're relocating all of you to Allied-controlled territory in North Africa until France is secure enough for your return." North Africa. The distance seemed immense to Marguerite, whose entire life had been lived within 50 kilometers of her birthplace. Yet the alternative, remaining in occupied France with the Germans growing increasingly desperate as defeat approached, was clearly more dangerous. Preparations for their departure began immediately. The Americans provided what civilian clothing they could procure, identity documents bearing false names and cover stories, should they encounter German forces during transport. Their evacuation route would take them south through the Pyrenees into Spain, then to Gibraltar, where a military transport would carry them to Algiers. On the eve of their departure, Marguerite stood outside the lodge, gazing at stars that seemed impossibly bright in the mountain air. The same stars shone over her farm in Bellerive, over the fields where her husband had taught her to identify constellations before the war had taken him. The same stars would soon witness thousands of young men storming beaches in northern France, many giving their lives to free a country some had never before visited. And somewhere under those same stars, a young American pilot named Thomas Dalton might be preparing for his own role in the coming battle. The thought brought both comfort and concern. Had he survived his additional missions? Would he participate in the invasion? Would he remember his promise to find her when the war ended? Captain Richards interrupted her stargazing, approaching with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Madame Dupont, I have something for you." He held out an envelope. "It arrived with our last supply drop, specifically requested to be delivered to you." Marguerite accepted the envelope with surprise. Her name was written on the front in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but clearly rushed. "Marguerite, I'm flying support for the big show. They won't tell us when or where, but it's soon. Remember, I promised to find you when this is over. I intend to keep that promise. Stay safe until then. T.D." Lieutenant Thomas Dalton had not forgotten. Despite the chaos of war preparations, despite the thousands of miles between them, he had found a way to reach out, to maintain the tenuous connection formed during those few critical days in her cellar. Marguerite carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, next to the small photograph of her husband that she had managed to bring from Bellerive. 2 men from different worlds, linked by war's strange geometry. One a memory she honored, the other a possibility she scarcely dared contemplate. Their journey began the following morning, a small convoy moving south through increasingly rugged terrain. The Americans had planned their route meticulously, avoiding known German positions and checkpoints. Still, in a country under occupation, danger lurked around every bend. Near the Spanish border, their worst fears materialized. The convoy rounded a curve to find a German roadblock directly ahead, 2 vehicles and approximately 10 soldiers checking all traffic. Retreat would draw immediate suspicion. Captain Richards made a split-second decision. "Stick to your cover stories," he instructed as they approached the checkpoint. "Let me do the talking." The lead American vehicle stopped at the barricade. A German officer approached, demanding identification and travel permits. Richards presented carefully forged documents identifying their group as French agricultural specialists being relocated to southern farms to improve food production for the Reich. The German studied the papers with narrowed eyes. "These are authorized by regional command, yet I received no notification of your passage." His suspicion was palpable. "Communications have been disrupted throughout the sector," Richards replied smoothly in fluent German. "Partisan activities have increased since reports of Allied movements along the coast." The mention of Allied activity drew the officer's full attention. "What reports? What have you heard?" "Only rumors. Something in Calais, perhaps. Our concern is food production, not military matters." The officer hesitated, clearly torn between detaining them for further questioning and the possibility that they were indeed legitimate. Agricultural production was a priority for a Reich facing increasing shortages. He was about to speak when distant aircraft engines drew everyone's attention skyward. A formation of Allied bombers passed high overhead, likely heading toward strategic targets in southern France or northern Italy. The German soldiers instinctively looked up, momentarily distracted. In that instant, Richards gave a subtle signal. The Americans moved with practiced efficiency, drawing concealed weapons. "Nobody move," Richards commanded in German, as his men quickly disarmed the surprised soldiers. What followed was a testament to professional military training. The Germans were secured, their communications equipment disabled, and their vehicles rendered inoperable, all within minutes and without a single shot fired. "They'll be found eventually," Richards told the evacuees as they continued their journey, "but we've bought enough time to reach the border." The Spanish crossing occurred that night at a remote mountain pass known to resistance operatives. Though officially neutral, Franco's Spain maintained complex relationships with both Axis and Allied powers. Border guards could be either helpful or hostile depending on personal sympathies and bribes offered. Fortunately, their crossing point was manned by guards who had been well compensated by Allied intelligence. The convoy passed into Spain with minimal scrutiny, the first step completed in their journey to safety. From there, they traveled to Gibraltar, the British territory at Spain's southern tip. For Marguerite and the other French evacuees, the sight of Allied flags flying openly, of military personnel moving without concealment, of ships and aircraft bearing American and British insignia, operating freely. It was their first tangible proof that another world existed beyond German occupation. On June 5th, they boarded a British transport ship bound for Algiers. The vessel was crowded with military supplies, wounded personnel returning from Italy, and other civilian evacuees from various European theatres. Marguerite found herself sharing a small cabin with Marie Leclerc and two Dutch women who had operated a resistance safe house in Amsterdam until their network had been compromised. It was aboard this ship on the morning of June 6, 1944, that they received the news. The invasion of Normandy had begun. Allied forces had established beachheads along the French coast and were pushing inland against fierce German resistance. Operation Overlord, D-Day, had finally arrived. The ship's common areas erupted in celebration. Soldiers, sailors, medical personnel, and evacuees embraced as an impromptu rendition of God Save the King gave way to the Star-Spangled Banner, and then La Marseillaise. Marguerite found herself singing the French national anthem for the first time in 4 years, tears streaming down her face as Claude Moreau's cracked voice joined hers, his bandaged hands raised in triumph. That evening, as the transport ship continued its journey across the Mediterranean, Marguerite stood at the rail watching the sun sink toward the horizon. So much had changed in the 6 months since she had found a wounded American pilot in the Clément vineyard. Her home, her livelihood, her very identity, all had been left behind. Yet she felt not loss, but transformation. She was no longer merely Marguerite Dupont, widow and dairy farmer. She had become something more, a link in a chain of humanity that had refused to be broken by tyranny. The North African Reception Center for European evacuees was located outside Algiers, in what had once been a luxury resort. Palm trees and bougainvillea created an atmosphere so divorced from war-torn Europe that many evacuees found it disorienting. Here, there were no bombed buildings, no occupation forces, no furtive resistance meetings. Here, people spoke freely, moved openly, lived normally. For Marguerite, the adjustment proved challenging. After years of constant vigilance, the absence of immediate danger left her feeling strangely vulnerable. She would start at sudden noises, instinctively check for German patrols before venturing outside, and hoard small amounts of food from meals, habits formed during occupation that refused to dissipate even in safety. "It will take time," Dr. Fournier told her during one of their regular gatherings of evacuees from Bellerive. The village physician had been extracted shortly after Claude, when his medical assistance to resistance members had been discovered. "Our bodies remember fear long after our minds accept safety." Weeks passed, then months. Summer heat gave way to autumn breezes in their Mediterranean sanctuary. News from France arrived regularly now. The liberation of Paris in August, the continued Allied advance eastward, the German retreat toward their homeland. Each bulletin brought Marguerite's potential return closer, yet also raised new questions. What would remain of Bellerive after years of occupation and the violence of liberation? Would there be a farm to return to? Would her neighbors welcome back those who had fled, or resent their escape from the hardships endured by those who remained? And what of the German quartermaster, Oberfeldwebel Keller, who had chosen decency over duty? Had his small act of humanity cost him his life when the deception was discovered? On December 23, 1944, as the evacuees prepared for their first Christmas celebration in freedom, Captain Richards arrived at the reception center with news. The Allied counter-offensive against the German Ardennes offensive, what would later be called the Battle of the Bulge, was succeeding. More importantly for the evacuees, parts of France were now secure enough for civilian return. "Those of you from eastern and northern regions will need to wait longer," he explained. "But areas liberated earlier in the campaign have been stabilized. Civilian authorities have been established. Reconstruction has begun." Marguerite's region fell into the category cleared for return. After more than 6 months in North Africa, she would finally go home. The journey was scheduled for mid-January, transportation arranged on military vessels, already making the crossing with supplies and reinforcements. The night before her departure, Marguerite sat with Claude Moreau and the other Bellerive evacuees for a final meal together. The old farmer had elected to remain in Algiers until spring, his arthritic condition finding relief in the warmer climate. "What will you do first when you return?" Marie Leclerc asked Marguerite as they shared a bottle of Algerian wine. Marguerite considered the question. "Feed my cows," she said finally, "if they're still there. And if they're not, then I'll find new ones." The simplicity of her answer belied the complexity of emotions beneath it. Returning meant rebuilding. Not just structures, but relationships, routines, purpose itself. It meant confronting losses and embracing new beginnings. It meant moving forward while honoring what had passed. The Mediterranean crossing in January proved rough, winter storms tossing the converted cargo vessel that transported Marguerite and 30 other returning civilians. Most suffered seasickness, but Marguerite found the violent motion oddly calming, a physical manifestation of the turbulence she anticipated in rebuilding her life. They landed at Marseille, a city still bearing the scars of recent conflict, yet humming with the energy of renewal. American military police escorted the returnees to a processing center where they received identity confirmation, travel permits for their home regions, and basic supply allotments to ease their transition. The final leg of Marguerite's journey took her by military transport to Lyon, then by a combination of requisitioned vehicles and, for the last 10 kilometers, on foot. When she finally crested the hill overlooking Bellerive in the fading light of a February afternoon, she stopped, momentarily overcome. The village had survived, though not unscathed. Several buildings showed damage from what appeared to be artillery fire. The church steeple, which had stood since the 16th century, was now truncated, its upper third missing. Fields that should have been ploughed for spring planting lay untouched, priorities elsewhere in the immediate aftermath of liberation. and yet smoke rose from chimneys. Children, actual children playing openly, darted between houses in some incomprehensible game. An elderly man walked a dog without furtiveness, without checking over his shoulder for patrols. These simple sights of normal life, absent for so long, brought tears to Marguerite's eyes. She continued down the road toward the village, her pace quickening despite exhaustion. As she approached the first houses, a woman emerged from a doorway, paused to look at the approaching figure, then called out in recognition, "Marguerite? Marguerite Dupont? My God, is it really you?" It was Madame Bertrand, the butcher's wife, now running toward Marguerite with arms outstretched. Their embrace was followed by others as word spread rapidly through the small community. "Marguerite has returned. The dairy farmer who helped the American pilot. She's alive." Through tears and laughter and countless embraces, Marguerite learned the village's fate. Liberation had come in September, American forces encountering only light resistance, as most German troops had already been repositioned to defend more strategic locations. The fighting had been brief, but destructive enough to damage several structures. No civilians had been killed during liberation, though 3 had died during occupation. 1 executed for resistance activities, 2 from illness exacerbated by malnutrition. "And my farm?" Marguerite asked finally. "My cows?" Faces fell. "The Germans used your farm as a command post after your escape," Monsieur Bertrand explained gently. "When they withdrew, they—" He trailed off, unwilling to finish. "They burned it," his wife completed for him. "I'm so sorry, Marguerite, the house, the barn, everything." Marguerite absorbed this news with surprising calm. Perhaps she had prepared herself for this possibility during the long months away. Perhaps after all she had witnessed, the loss of buildings seemed minor compared to the human cost of war. "And my animals?" "2 cows survived," said young Pierre Leclerc, Marie's nephew. "We've been keeping them with ours. The others were taken by the Germans when food grew scarce." 2 cows. From such small beginnings, her husband had built their dairy farm after their marriage. From such small beginnings, she could build again. That night, Marguerite stayed with the Bertrand family, sharing their modest dinner and updating them on the other evacuees still in North Africa. The conversation eventually turned to Oberfeldwebel Werner Keller, the German quartermaster, whose quiet act of conscience had saved her life. "He disappeared 3 days after you escaped," Monsieur Bertrand said. "The security service came for him. We assumed the worst." "He knew the risk," Marguerite replied softly, "yet he helped anyway." The following morning, Marguerite walked to her property for the first time in 8 months. The devastation was complete. Blackened stone foundations where her house had stood, the collapsed remains of the barn, fields untended and overgrown. Only the root cellar remained partially intact, its stones too solid to be fully destroyed by fire. As she surveyed the ruins of her former life, a vehicle approached on the farm road, an American jeep driven by a soldier who parked and approached with an envelope in hand. "Madame Dupont?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm delivering this on behalf of Lieutenant Thomas Dalton, ma'am. He asked that it reach you as soon as you return to Bellerive." Marguerite accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was another letter, longer than the first, and a photograph of a young man in pilot's uniform standing beside his aircraft. The letter began simply, "Marguerite, I've thought of you every day since that night at the quarry. My promise stands. I'm coming to find you as soon as my service allows. Wait for me if you can. Thomas." Marguerite looked from the letter to the ruins of her farm, then to the distant village beginning its own rebuilding. Perhaps reconstruction could take many forms. Perhaps new foundations could be laid alongside the old. That afternoon, she began clearing debris from what remained of her home, working methodically, stone by stone. Several villagers noticed and came to help without being asked. By evening, the site had been prepared for whatever might come next. As spring arrived, bringing new growth to fields that had known only destruction, Marguerite rebuilt her life with the same quiet determination that had characterized her resistance. A small cottage rose where her farmhouse had stood, its construction a community effort. Her 2 surviving cows became 4 through a barter arrangement with a neighboring farm. New routines replaced old ones, adaptation flowering from necessity. On a warm day in late May, as Marguerite was mending a fence in the newly reconstructed paddock, she heard a vehicle approaching. Visitors were common now, officials documenting war damages, military personnel conducting area assessments, relief workers distributing supplies. She continued her work without looking up until the vehicle stopped and a familiar voice called her name. Marguerite Dupont? She turned to see a tall figure in American uniform standing beside a military jeep. For a moment she didn't recognize him without the pallor of injury and fear that had marked their previous encounter. Then realization dawned. Thomas? Lieutenant Thomas Dalton, no longer wounded, no longer hunted, stood before her with the same summer sky eyes she remembered. I told you I'd come back, he said simply. Marguerite set down her tools and walked toward him, crossing the distance between them just as she had crossed the distance between their worlds on that December night in 1943. They stood facing each other, two people forever changed by war, connected by choices made when it would have been easier not to choose at all. Your farm, he said, looking around at the partially rebuilt structures. They said in the village it was destroyed. It was, she confirmed, but not everything that's broken stays that way. Thomas nodded, understanding the layers in her words. I'm being discharged next month, going home to Connecticut. He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. I'd like to write to you, if that's permitted, perhaps visit again someday. I would welcome both, Marguerite replied with equal care. What followed was neither the passionate reunion of Hollywood fantasy nor the awkward meeting of strangers. It was something more honest, the quiet recognition of two lives intersecting at a point of shared humanity, the acknowledgement of a connection formed under extraordinary circumstances that might, with time and care, grow into something neither could yet define. They spent the afternoon walking the boundaries of her property, Thomas listening as Marguerite outlined her plans for rebuilding, offering suggestions from his engineering background. When he departed that evening, it was with a promise to write and to return when circumstances allowed. The years that followed brought reconstruction to Bellerive and to all of France. Marguerite's small dairy operation grew steadily, modernizing with equipment purchased through Marshall Plan funds. Claude Moreau returned from North Africa to find his farmhouse intact, but his fields neglected. With Marguerite's help, he restored them to productivity before peacefully passing away in his sleep in 1952. Thomas Dalton kept his word, his letters arriving with increasing frequency. He visited again in 1946, this time staying for 3 weeks to help complete the new barn. His third visit in the summer of 1947 extended to 2 months and concluded with a question that Marguerite, after careful consideration, answered affirmatively. Their marriage the following spring surprised no one in Bellerive. The American pilot and the French farmer who had saved his life created a narrative too compelling to deny, a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, individual acts of courage and compassion could illuminate paths forward. The dairy farm expanded under their joint management, Thomas's engineering expertise complementing Marguerite's agricultural knowledge. They added cheese production, then a small creamery that eventually employed 15 local residents. Their home became a gathering place for village celebrations and a regular stop for American veterans making pilgrimages to the countries they had helped liberate. In 1955, while expanding the root cellar, they uncovered a rusted identification tag bearing the name and rank of Oberfeldwebel Werner Keller. How it came to be there remained a mystery, perhaps dropped during the search, perhaps placed deliberately as a final gesture from a man who had chosen humanity over allegiance. Thomas had it framed alongside his own dog tags, a reminder that courage wears many uniforms. On summer evenings, long after the war had faded from headlines if not from memory, Thomas and Marguerite often sat on their porch watching sunset paint the distant hills gold and crimson. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of narrow escapes and wider perspectives gained. More often, they discussed the future, their creamery's production, community developments, the changing world their children would inherit. For Marguerite Dupont Dalton, the most remarkable aspect of her extraordinary journey was how ordinary it ultimately became. not diminished by normality, but enriched by it. The daily rhythms of farming, marriage, community, and family formed a counterpoint to the chaos from which they had emerged, proof that what humans destroy, humans can also rebuild. The tale of the French farmer who hid an American pilot eventually became part of local lore, shared with diminishing accuracy but enduring admiration as years passed. Yet the true legacy lay not in the story, but in its aftermath, in lives reclaimed from warfare's wreckage, in a community restored through collective resilience, in the quiet dignity of moving forward while honoring what had been lost. In the end, perhaps that is the most profound form of resistance, not merely surviving darkness, but emerging from it still capable of creating light. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.